Months after a young woman's shocking death, her husband, a pastor at a South Carolina church, is apparently the focus now of the FBI, and they just searched his home. We're talking, of course, about John Paul Miller, but if this FBI search is not connected to the death of Mica Miller, then what could be the focus? We're going to sit down with a lawyer who was actually at the scene during the FBI search, as well as a former FBI agent, to get a peek into what might be going on behind the scenes. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So this is a story that went viral back in April. John Paul Miller, who was a pastor at Solid Rock Church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, announced at the end of a sermon that his wife, 30-year-old Mica, was dead. And he said that she had taken her own life at a state park in North Carolina. The backlash to this was swift. Friends, family of Mica Miller, they immediately suspected John Paul might have had something to do with her death. And even though apparently it was announced at the time that he was hundreds of miles away in Charleston when Mica died, and to be clear, he has never been criminally charged in connection with her death, but nonetheless, supporters of Mica, those closest to her, they have launched a campaign to bring attention to the problems that John Paul and Mica were having in their marriage. They wanted an investigation into whether John Paul might have even intentionally pushed Mica to take her own life. Now, John Paul, though, to be clear, stepped down from his role or his positions at the church in May. The medical examiner did officially rule that Mica died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. She was seen on surveillance video buying a gun at a pawn shop before she drove to Lumber River State Park. This is just over the state line in North Carolina. Mica even called 911 to let them know what she was about to do so her family could find her body. The dispatcher had tried to talk her out of it, but it was too late. John Paul and his father, though, they've always maintained that Mica suffered from serious mental health problems, and they claim that she had stopped taking her medication. But there were several factors that we're going to get into that made her family and friends, and those who've been following the story, suspicious, like the fact that Mica had filed for divorce before her death, John Paul's criminal record, what court paperwork from his first marriage revealed about the relationship. At the time of Mica's death, the Robeson County Sheriff's Office said the FBI was conducting a, quote, parallel investigation, but said that that investigation didn't involve Mica or her death. I should be more specific about that. And now, what we want to talk about is brand new information. That FBI agents were at John Paul's Myrtle Beach home at the end of last week. But the exact reasons for why they were searching his home are still a little bit vague. So to talk about this, I want to bring on attorney Regina Ward, who actually had been representing Mica in her divorce case against John Paul, and it's our understanding she was there at the time FBI conducted this search. And I'm also joined by former CIA and FBI agent Tracy Walder, News Nation contributor. Great to have you both here. Thank you so much. Regina, I'll start with you. So you were there. Why were you there? And what can you tell us about what you observed?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I wasn't there in the beginning, obviously. I didn't get there till later in the afternoon. When I arrived, there was still, plenty of Mica supporters there, lots and lots of FBI agents everywhere, all of the classic FBI cars and such. I actually stood over with the neighbor right next to John Paul Miller's home. And so I was able to observe for myself some of the items that were being, brought out from the home. And so I got to see some of that. Of course, I don't have the knowledge of what's inside some of those paper bags and boxes, of course, but obviously I did see some things that they took out.
Well, what were some of the things that you saw them take out?
Well, one of the things that I was most pleased with that I saw taken out of that house was a large all-in-one computer. And so my thought process, of course, is that there's probably stuff on there or evidence on there that's going to help the FBI take the next step in this case.
By the way, as you may know, we have been actively following the Mica Miller story for a while here on Sidebar. We've been trying to stay up to date on any new developments. And one of the reasons that we're able to continue to do that kind of work is not only because of you guys, and we can't thank you enough for your support, but also because of our sponsors and the work they do with us. And I have to call out one in particular right now, Upside. Upside's awesome. Upside is a free app, so easy to use, that helps you get cash back when you buy food, gas, and groceries. Real money, real cash back, money that appears in your Upside app that you can transfer straight into your bank account. Here, you can see I used Upside to find a gas station. I claimed an offer, pay with my credit card at the pump, followed the steps on the app. Guess what? I got cash back. And you can use Upside at all different kinds of places, restaurants, convenience stores. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen and use our promo code Sidebar and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Hope you can check it out. Do you have any idea what this is about? Did you speak to any of the FBI agents at the scene?
I actually do have and know the agents' names that are assigned to Mica's case. In fact, I guess that maybe a couple of months ago or so, I was actually served with a U.S. grand jury subpoena for all of my file materials and things that belong to Mica. So I knew firsthand at that point that it was actually serious. It wasn't just Robeson County saying, oh, FBI came and did a parallel search. No, they were actually activating an investigation and was collecting the evidence, starting with me and witnesses and other potential victims and so forth. And of course, taking those next steps to execute a search warrant.
To be clear, though, is this about Mica's death or her relationship with John Paul? That might have, maybe, from what I'm hearing what you're saying, might have to not just be about Mica, but other people as well. I think you used the word victim or alleged victims. Are you saying this is larger than Mica? Is it about her death or is it something else?
Right. Anything that I would know personally, if anything at all, there would be certain things that I wouldn't be able to disclose anyway, but
Sure.
I'll put it this way. This case and that search warrant was definitely about Mica, whether it was directly related to her, her untimely death. The thing that I'm saying is that with regard to that search warrant, it had Mica's name all over it because, but for Mica leaving behind journals and evidence and information that would leave a trail for the FBI to follow, they would have never knocked on his door ever to begin with. So is it directly related to Mica and her passing? Well, gosh, I certainly hope so to some degree, but I also say this, that don't forget, there have been plenty of people in the past where we never got to arrest them for what we alleged that they had done. I always like to say, Al Capone didn't go to prison for murdering anyone. He went to prison for tax evasion. Jail is jail. Would I like for it to be something directly related to, him tying him with Mica? Yeah, but if it's something else, I'm fine with that too. Jail is jail. One of the things that I wanted the public to, obviously clearly understand is about the type of evidence that the FBI has now gotten access to. When we think about things, especially with our wonderful Constitution that protects us all, right, is from unreasonable searches and having an expectation of privacy in our homes. The federal magistrate is not going to just willy-nilly hand out a search warrant with, without the good probable cause. But the point that I wanted to make is that now the FBI will have access to evidence that they have retrieved from him that he expected to have some sort of expectation of privacy in. And those things would be email threads, email chains, text messages, website history on that computer, all of the things that we usually, consider to be private to us, and those private documents, computer files, and that type of thing. So in the future, any of that type of evidence, if Mr. Miller wants to say, oh, yes, I wrote that letter admitting all of those things, but my wife told me to write it, therefore explaining it away. In this situation, whatever the FBI has retrieved there cannot be denied. It came from his home and from his source and under an expectation of privacy. So I think that that's going to be some very strong evidence that would be coming forth somewhere down the road.
All right, Tracy, let me turn this over to you. So our understanding is John Paul reportedly wasn't home during this search. Your thoughts on, was that intentional? And you're hearing what Regina's saying about what was collected from the house. What's your impression?
Well, so first to mention what Regina said, you have to have probable cause to get a search warrant. So they were obviously collecting on him on this case for quite some time. And part of me does wonder if this is more than just about the death of Micah, quite frankly, simply because of the fact that the FBI is involved and is executing a search warrant. My mind actually goes to some financial issues as well, as that is something that obviously that we investigate quite a bit. Now, in terms of serving a search warrant, it's actually usually preferable for the person not to be home, for us to serve that search warrant. My guess is, again, I don't have insider information. I can only just go off of what I have done in the past. We typically surveil the person actually for a period of a couple of weeks. These things don't happen automatically per se. We surveil them, we get to know sort of their routine, if you will. And my guess is it was a routine departure from the home, whether he was picking someone up, whether he was going to work, whether he was doing something that he typically does. They waited for him to be gone to serve that search warrant.
Let me expand upon that a little bit more because according to Kevin Miller, who's a spokesman for the Columbia, South Carolina FBI office, this was a court-authorized search. He declined to comment to the media as to the reason for the search, if anything was retrieved from the house. Will the FBI, Tracy, federal authorities reveal anything quite yet, or will they keep everything close to the vest unless or until there are charges?
I personally think that they are going to keep that information close to the vest until there are charges. They don't have to reveal that information. And to be completely blunt, Jesse, I'm sorry to be so blunt, it doesn't necessarily serve them right now to reveal that information. And quite frankly, in order to get the charges against him, they don't even have to reveal everything they have, just enough, right, to get those charges. So I am not certain that we will know anything right away until or if there is an arrest.
Regina, going back to you about that scene, you mentioned that there were people outside, protesters. They were posted up outside, I think, the Solid Rock Church. They made their way to the home. They were holding signs that said "Justice for Micah." What was that like? What was that scene like?
Yes, it actually it was a fairly familiar scene that we've seen many times in many different places. I'll tell you, the people who are in support following this case and so forth are dedicated to seeing it through and are hopeful and at any place that they can to offer their support and to encourage. It was quite interesting too, because one thing that I liked seeing too was that when the FBI finished, was getting ready to leave the scene, everyone was clapping for them and, and chanting and, saying you can't hide from the FBI, which is true. And I'm so glad that that it was mentioned that, people have made comments. John Paul just barely missed the FBI. I can assure you this was a very calculated, planned maneuver by the FBI, and they knew exactly where John Paul Miller was at the time that they did that. But I also wanted to say, too, with regard to potentially other victims of John Paul Miller himself, or those who are associated with him, or that type of thing, that the police, the way we end domestic violence is by a victim breaking their silence. And so I would encourage anyone out there that feels that they have been victimized by him or any associations with the church, etc., to please reach out. If you don't want to, call a line that you don't know who's going to answer the other end, you're welcome to call my office. I'll put you in touch with the people who are actually involved with the case, because the more folks who have been victims of this, of a crime potentially or some sort of abuse with him, the more of those that come forward, the stronger the case. And so it's just critically important that we all continue to stand together, fight for Micah, because when we fight for Micah, we're fighting for everyone else who's lived in the same situation.
So, Regina, what would be your reaction to when Russell Long, who is an attorney that's representing John Paul Miller, said, look, he doesn't have more information than anyone else because he said to local media there was no affidavit attached to the search warrant, so he didn't really know what this was about. But what he did say is that this was a fishing expedition. What's your response to that?
Well, sure it is. I mean, that's part of it. There's a step, not necessarily a fishing expedition. Like, for instance, the FBI didn't have anything to go on. We have to go back to, you cannot get a warrant unless there's probable cause, meaning more likely than not a crime has been committed. So, a federal magistrate is not going to sign off on a warrant unless there's, an indication that there's more to be gotten there. So that, obviously the next steps is, after getting all of the evidence they took from there, is it's going to take some time. And I want the public to understand, please be patient. I know some of the folks were saying, my gosh, it's taken too long. It's taken too long. No, this is a very slow, methodical process. If he does get indicted, we want those charges to stick. We want it to go all the way through. So it doesn't need to be a rushed and hurried investigation. And they will take their time and sift slowly through each item, cataloging, evaluating, following clues to the next clue. So it's going to be some time, but I can tell you this, I do know for sure, there's more to come.
Well, Tracy, let's talk about that. Let's talk about next steps here, in the sense that neighbors said that, who were observing this search, they said the FBI agents were wearing shirts that said Evidence Response Team. They were taking out bags from the home, as we were just talking about with Regina. Talk to us about what happens. What does the evidence response team do? What is the next steps once they collect this evidence? Talk us about what happens behind the scenes.
So the ERT, or Evidence Response Team, is really attached to basically all FBI offices. The larger ones, some of the smaller ones have them as well, or they take from their larger offices that are the closest by. And really, their main job is to process properly and catalog all of that evidence. So I think there's sometimes a misconception that when FBI agents are going in, that we are also gathering the evidence. And sometimes we are, but more often than not, we are actually not. We are trained in how to, but the evidence response team, or the ERT, that is what they have explicitly at Quantico been trained to do. Most of them are not FBI agents, although some of them actually can be, and they can work in those kind of dual roles. And they are what we call bagging and tagging all of that evidence, and then putting it into a register, and then taking it back to the office so that it can be kept there securely to be processed.
And Tracy, what's the relationship between the FBI and federal prosecutors? In a case, again, we still don't know all the details. Regina maybe does, but obviously can't share. But what's that relationship like in terms of next steps?
Oh, it's very, very close. Sometimes we get a little frustrated, quite frankly, with the federal prosecutors, because the reality is when you're serving a search warrant, and I said this before, actually, when you and I talked about the Diddy case, there was no question that there was going to be a subsequent indictment, in my opinion. And I am so grateful for Regina talking about how long it takes. It takes a long time, especially when there's digital evidence, to go through all of that. So we do need to be patient. It is very, very close. We are in contact with them all of the time, because they don't want to issue charges or an indictment without really a preponderance of evidence, quite frankly. The reality is if we are there serving a search warrant, charges are definitely forthcoming.
Regina, before I let you go, I wanted to ask you one other thing, and to bring a larger perspective to this. So friends and family, they have alleged that John Paul, who's, I believe, 14 years older than Mica, the allegation was that he groomed her from the time that she was a teenager and that he was a youth pastor. They also claim that John Paul was abusive toward Mica. In fact, Mica had posted on her social media in the weeks before her death, offering her support to people who are in this kind of circumstances.
So you don't have to stay in a abusive relationship, whether that's sexual, whether that's somebody forcing you to take illegal drugs, or alcohol abuse, or physical abuse, psychological abuse, making you think that this is all your fault, or you're a bad mom, or you're a bad wife, or you're a bad husband, or you're not giving it your all when you know you are. God hates divorce, but why? According to everybody I've asked and the scriptures that I've found, it's because it hurts people. But does abuse hurt people? How do you think God feels about that?
Now, that video is from March of this year. Mica died the following month. And since then, there have been concerning reports coming out about John Paul. For example, we learned from court documents that were filed by John Paul's ex-wife, Alyssa, that John Paul and Mica were having difficulty at home, which was impacting the 4 children that they shared custody of, and in a verified complaint in support of her request to modify custody, child support, alimony, it says, plaintiff alleges that since the entry of the party's prior final order, defendant has exhibited increasingly unstable behaviors, failed to provide a safe and stable environment for the minor children during the periods of visitation, and has exposed and involved the minor children in incidents of domestic dispute and discord, which have been traumatic to the minor children and not in their best interest. She also goes on to accuse John Paul, who she calls JP, of deviant sexual behavior, and she claims that Mica was actually their babysitter, but John Paul had started this relationship with her. What can you tell us about all that?
Well, goodness, there's a whole lot to unpack there, but basically, I would say most of that, not that most of that, I should say that is an accurate representation from what the information that I have. There's actually a whole lot more to it that's not been disclosed to the public, will not be disclosed to the public for various reasons. So yes, there were lots of things that were happening. And Mica herself had even was concerned and called his ex-wife to say, please come get your children. I think there's a concern.
Tracy, before I let you go, I wanted to ask you one more thing as we're thinking about why the FBI conducted this search without him being present, these allegations, what we're talking about. He has a criminal record, John Paul Miller. He pled guilty in South Carolina to assault and battery. He ended up being sentenced to 500 hours of community service. He was put on probation. There was a 4-year prison sentence that was suspended. And then it's our understanding in 2022, the South Carolina court records indicated that Miller was pardoned for that assault and battery case. His ex-wife Alyssa claims that he used his connections in the community to make that happen. So when you hear that, and now you're connecting it to what might the investigation look like, and this is obviously why people have questions about John Paul and his relationship to Mica, and if we're listening to Regina, potentially other people that could be connected. Just what are your initial thoughts about that?
So my initial thoughts are they are most likely, again, I don't have insider knowledge, but they are most likely, this is beyond Mica, in my opinion. I obviously want justice for her, but I think this is bigger than that. Otherwise, I don't believe the FBI would be serving a search warrant. I believe that this extends to other victims that he may have potentially groomed, or to his ministry itself, looking at some of those financial dealings and looking at some of maybe the exchanges that he had with other victims. I think this is larger than an assault charge, perhaps larger than murder. I think this is going into maybe racketeering. I think this is going into finances, postal fraud, those kinds of things, perhaps even pornography. I don't know. But that is typically when the FBI gets involved in serving search warrants. And if they're bringing things out, such as computers, digital evidence, those kinds of things, that's usually what we find on there.
And just to be clear, just to hammer that home, we're not accusing him of any of that. We're just saying this is things that the FBI has looked for in the past and what might be characteristics of a search like this. But listen, here's what we do know. There's still a lot more answers, still a lot more questions we have in this. Hopefully we'll get some answers. Just an interesting development. But Regina Ward, Tracy Walder, thank you both for coming on. Really appreciate you both taking the time.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.